right, it's 6:30. I'll bring the meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. The meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Enosburg Falls is being conducted electronically in order to ensure the safety of all attendees and to maintain compliance with Governor Scott's executive order. Per H 681 signed into law March 30th, 2020, Section 6, there's a temporary suspension of designated physical meeting location requirements of Vermont's open meeting law, VSA Section 312. In order to ensure that all attendees can hear clearly, your audio may be muted. When you wish to speak, you can raise your hand in the participant list or by submitting a chat request, or if you called in by pressing *9. Once acknowledged by the chair, please clearly state your name and then proceed with a question or comment. Please remember that when unmuted, all participants can hear any sounds in your environment. Again, this meeting is being recorded. All right, we'll do a roll call. Leonard?
Here.
Jason?
Here.
Heather?
Here.
Cindy?
Here.
All right, all the board members are in attendance. First on the agenda, we have modifications or changes. Does anybody have any modifications or changes? All right, we'll move on to public comment. I don't think there's anybody here from the public tonight. No, there is not. So we'll move on to 2021 annual village meeting.
So maybe I can tee this up and then turn it over to Andy Bolio, our village clerk. So board will recall we first brought this subject up at your December 8th meeting to have a discussion about the options that are available to local governments in the state of Vermont now as a result of the pandemic regarding annual meetings and how they can be held. And each legislative body at the local government across the state will have to, decide on its own how it wants to handle that. But you have three options that you can consider for annual meeting. The new option, which is made available because of a temporary amendment that the legislature made back in October of 2020 before it broke its session for the year, which will allow boards to hold an Australian ballot method of annual meeting, and in conjunction with that also allow for the informational meeting prior to the Australian ballot to be held electronically. Then the second option is, of course, if you have meetings that are done from the floor, which traditionally the Village of Enosburg Falls does, you can attempt, if you want, to hold a physical meeting and do your business from the floor. However, there's, I would say, some considerable risk with that. Given the pandemic, the situation we're all in, and just all of the uncertainty around that, and what Vermont and the world may look like come March. So, and it's quite possible that the legislature too, if things did continue to get worse concerning the pandemic, they may put some further regulations in place that could actually prevent you from holding a physical meeting. And then you would, then you'd be in kind of a tough position if that happened and you had been planning on doing it. So, something to consider there. And there is a third option. The legislature does allow for a local government body to postpone the meeting and set it for a later time if you wanted to try and do that, set it in April or May or something, and again, see if things were a little bit better with the pandemic come spring or something. But again, there's risk in that too, because you don't really know what's going to happen. Nobody does with this pandemic. So things could be better, they could be worse too. And so if you postpone it, you do run that risk, and I just need to point that out to you. So those were the three options that all legislative bodies at the local government level have in Vermont to consider your annual meeting. Couple other things I'll just let the board know. The town of Enosburg at their meeting, their select board meeting last night, did decide to go to Australian ballot vote. So that is a choice that they made last evening. I just thought you might, be curious to know that. And they are going to hold their polling place at the Emergency Services Building. So, because you still have to have a physical polling place where people can cast a physical ballot if that's what they choose to do. So the town has decided they're going to have their polling place at the Emergency Services Building, and they'll have the date of the vote, what their regular annual meeting date would be, which is the first Tuesday of March. I think that's March 2nd this year. So at the conclusion of our last discussion back in December on this, the board had a lot of questions concerning the Australian ballot itself and the process. And so it seemed to make the most sense to invite our clerk in, who is the person responsible for conducting elections in the municipality, and let you guys talk with Andy Bolio directly, our village clerk. A couple other things I guess I would point out is, remember, there are 2 Board of Trustee positions up for re-election this year as well. Those would be Sam and Leonard. So you guys may want to be thinking about, whether you want to run for another term. And I understand there are also some changes in the way that petitions would be held for people who want to run as an elected official in communities across Vermont as well. So what I understand, and Andy can probably elaborate a little bit more on that, but what I understand is you won't be required to get the signatures on the petition that you would normally have to be on the ballot, to have your name on the ballot. But there is a special consent form that you'll have to sign and give to the village clerk in order to have your name on the ballot. So Andy can, if you have further questions about that, I'm sure Andy can talk with you about it. But I guess I've teed that up pretty well. I don't know, Andy, if there's anything that you want to say to the board, or if not, board, Andy is here to try and answer any questions about the election process itself that you might have.
Yeah, I'm ready for the questions, whoever has them at this time.
I'm good.
Do you have any concerns with doing the Australian ballot? Do you think you're able to facilitate that? And if so, where do you think would be a good location to have the polling place?
I think possibly the emergency building would be as a good a setup as we could get. I think you're able to spread out, because we're going to have to hold a polling place. So we've got more room to spread out and keep our distance from each other.
And do you think the Australian ballot is a good way to go, or do you have any other suggestions?
Under the conditions of what we're facing right now with the virus and everything else, I think it's the way to go.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I don't think we should postpone.
I don't either.
Whenever.
No, I think postponing is a bad idea.
Yeah, me too.
Right, I noticed that the last part of that folder that I presented to you over the weekend, that was one of the options to postpone it, but we have no guarantee of what April, May, what's going to bring. It could be worse.
Happened.
And then we're right back to square one, starting all over.
The option.
I'm all for do it and get it done with.
Yeah, yeah,
Go along with you, Cindy.
yeah.
We're
for
here to
sure.
help you, Andy.
Does anybody want to hold a physical meeting, or do you think that Australian ballot's the way to go?
Australian ballot.
Okay.
I vote
Makes the
for
most
Australian
sense.
ballot too.
All right. It seems like we're all kind of on the same page here then. So if Andy, if you don't see any problems with that, I think we should start gearing up for an Australian ballot.
I'll go along with that. I appreciate all your input, but I think that's the way to go at this point.
I was wondering if we're gonna, since we're in agreement to do the Australian ballot, about the sending the ballots, mailing them out to all registered voters,
cannot-
like they did
We
in
cannot do
November.
that.
They have to
They have
request
to
it,
request
don't
the-
they?
They have to
Yeah.
request the ballot.
Right. Did
Well,
everybody
I
read
thought,
this?
I read it that you could request to do that.
No, they have to request the actual ballot.
Right.
An absentee.
D position.
Okay,
Right.
I just misread that, thank you, okay. I read it as we could request to do that. That's how I read it.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Other questions on that?
I'm sorry, board. I've got something. The reason I got up and left was I just want to let you know I've got something a little different going on with my computer. It's telling me that it's going to automatically shut off and reboot in 29 minutes. Usually that's happened before, but usually it gives you a snooze option where you can delay that from happening. But for some reason, it's not allowing that. And I just had Matt look at this to see if he can figure out a way to bypass it. And apparently there isn't. So in about 29 minutes, I'm going to be, my computer's going to shut down. And hopefully it won't take but, a few minutes for it to reboot itself, hopefully. So you'll lose me temporarily, and then I'll be able to come back again. So I'm sorry I missed some of the discussion there. Were there any questions that came up that the board felt like you didn't get answers to?
Nope.
Don't believe so.
We can be done in 29 minutes.
I like your optimism, Cindy.
Yeah. We got this.
And also, John, I think we're going to just go with the Australian ballot. And if we can use the emergency services building for a polling location, then we'll go that route.
We can. I had a discussion this morning with Billy Joe Draper, the town clerk, and she said that the town would make that building available to us if we also wanted to use it for a polling place. So that's good if the board feels comfortable with that. I think then maybe the next thing to decide related to the annual meeting would be when you want to hold the informational meeting. Typically it's done, if you're doing an Australian ballot form of annual meeting, typically it's done the night before you would vote. So in our case, our annual vote, if we hold to the time we would normally have annual meeting, will be March 9th on Tuesday. So if you want to do that, then the informational meeting would be on the Monday night before, which would be March 8th. It doesn't have to be the night before. It can be any time, I think, within 10 days prior to the vote. But normally that's how it's done. But I remember there was one board member when we last talked about this that asked if it had to be the night before. So it doesn't have to be, but that's typically when it's done.
Cindy, do you have a question?
Actually, I had a comment. We're going to go with the Australian ballot. I believe we need to do the informational meeting the week before. That way people are informed before whenever they do an absentee ballot, they do it ahead of time. So they may not have all their information when they do that.
I agree, Cindy. Possibly even, I give like a 10-day window. So at the very least, 7 days before, but to give
Yes.
people the opportunity to mail it in.
Right.
Okay, so the week before would be actually the town's annual meeting day. So may not be a good day to do it because the town's annual vote will be taking that day.
Mhm.
Just something to think about, but maybe you could do it the day after, the Wednesday night.
We
Right,
could look
well,
to see what, when they're gonna hold their informational meeting as well and kind of
They're-
work
they're
around
doing-
it with,
They're doing their informational meeting the night before. So it would be March 1st, Monday night, March 1st, and then they're going to do the vote the day that they would normally have their annual meeting, which is Tuesday, March 2nd.
so maybe March 3rd or end of
Right, so if
February.
you did it, if you wanted to do it, the day after the town's vote, Wednesday, March 3rd, that's a little more leeway.
We want our voters to be informed.
Yeah, understand you still run the risk though, because people can vote up to 20 days prior to the day of the vote if they request an absentee ballot.
Yeah, I
So-
understand that.
So you still run the risk that there's very likely some people that will be voting before the informational meeting.
right? But at least it gives people the opportunity if they want to vote from home to get the meeting and then the information and then mail it in if they need to mail it in.
Yeah, it gives them more time. Yeah.
What exactly would we be covering under the informational meeting?
Well, that is to be determined, depending on how our budget discussions go. But they will be voting on essentially the items that we would typically have in our warning, plus the election of our officials, our village officials. So the village officials would be the 2 trustee positions that are up for election. The village clerk, the village treasurer, and the village moderator. Those would be the elected positions. And then whatever we would normally be voting on under our warning.
Mhm.
So
Like the
basically,
paving projects and the budget and
right, it'd be basically the budget, and if there are
the
any bond,
appropriation.
yeah, any appropriations, if there are any special bond votes, then that would be part of the Australian ballot process as well. And so that will all be fleshed out as we go through the budget process.
Another reason for doing it as far in advance as we are able to is it'll be recorded and people will be able to watch the recording at their leisure if they can't attend the meeting in the evening.
Right. Do we need to vote on that when we have our informational meeting?
Yeah, so when you guys
There.
feel comfortable with the discussion and you're ready to actually vote on it, someone will need to make a motion to incorporate all those things that
Okay.
we've decided to go to Australian ballot vote.
Yeah.
The vote will take place on March 9th, and your informational meeting will be held on March 3rd, if that's the date you want to hold it on.
And you said that's a Wednesday?
March 3rd would be a
It's
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Nobody's on the DBR or anything like that that might conflict with that?
Well, that's a good question. Cindy,
That's the only group I know that has meetings on Wednesdays.
yeah, I don't,
Typically, those are the third Wednesday.
Oh, okay. Well, then I
Okay.
make a motion that we have our informational meeting on March 3rd
okay, at 6:30 PM.
at 6:30 PM.
And Australian ballot, correct?
And, oh, yes, and the Australian ballot.
Okay, so
To be voted on March 9th. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, do I need to rephrase that so it encompasses all of that?
Well, just so we got it all the pieces in there for posterity's sake.
Okay, I make a motion that we have an informational meeting on March 3rd at 6:30 PM for our Australian ballot voting on March 9th.
All right, Cindy has the first motion. Do I hear a second?
Second that.
So,
Jason with the second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. All right, looks like we have a meeting type and time. Thank you, Andy, for coming in.
Thank you, Andy.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Andy.
you, Andy.
Okay, up next, we got the 2021 budget. The big one.
Yeah, so in tonight's budget discussions, we've got first the electric department, and then the public works / general fund that we will be discussing as well after electric department. So as we always do during the budget process, we've got department heads here tonight that you can have direct discussions with if there are questions regarding their individual budgets, anything you want to ask of them. And they may have some questions for you too, or some things to add to my commentary about their department budgets. And hopefully, you know, there's a good exchange of information here. That's the whole purpose of bringing the department heads in, is so that they can be available and have some FaceTime with you guys and, you know, have an open conversation with you about what's on their mind and some of the priorities within their budget. So without any further ado then, why don't we get into some of the discussions about the electric department. Keep in mind, you know, we have several more meetings in which we will have discussions on budget items. So, you know, this isn't your one and only chance. You've got, you know, several other chances to talk about different things in each department and any questions you may have. So the draft, though, that you have in front of you for the electric department is shown with quite a few decisions that will need to be made by the Board of Trustees as we continue through the budget process. We're showing a $428,168 deficit in the department. The bulk of this is coming from power supply related costs. This occurs through a $114,445 increase in purchase power, $79,946 in transmission costs, $120,000 increase in distribution costs, all of which are part of your power supply cost. These are numbers that are put together by Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, of which we are a member, on our behalf. In addition, there's $9,000 for the purchase of a used digger truck meant to be a temporary replacement for the lost digger truck that the board will recall was totaled in an accident July of this past year, July of 2020. As an aside from that, just so you're aware, the insurance settlement around the digger truck that was in the accident came in at $72,360. That's what we got from the insurance company as a settlement on that damaged vehicle. In the capital projects section, you'll see the purchase of a new digger truck to replace the total vehicle. However, we're told there is a 12-year minimum wait time on delivery of new digger trucks right now.
I think you said years, John.
Pardon?
I think you said years, not months. You said 12 years. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a minimum 1 year.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Sorry if I said years. So there's a minimum 1 year delivery time, we're told, on the new digger trucks once you put the order in. So that's, it's a bit of time, and that's where our thinking comes in, that we're going to need something, in the meantime, to replace the vehicle that was damaged, because we don't have anything right now. And Swanton Village has been very generous, allowing us to use their digger truck for a period. But then the truck that we're proposing to purchase, this used one, we've sort of been on loan from Franklin Telephone Company. And they're interested in selling it to us. It's a vehicle they're not using anymore, but it is very old. What's the year on that again, Dave?
I believe it's a 98.
It's a 98. So it's quite old, but it's in okay shape. Our guys have been using it for a couple of months now.
Yeah, almost a month.
Almost a month, okay. And it seems to be performing okay. At least that's what Dave tells me. They haven't had any problems with it. And Franklin Telephone is willing to sell it to us for what we think is a pretty reasonable price at $9,000. And that would at least get us a digger truck, that was ours, that we could continue to use until we get a new one in. But as I said, that's going to take a while, a minimum of a year. So that's kind of our thinking on that. Anything you want to say about that subject, Dave, right now?
The digger, it's the one we're using, is working out right now. It's an older truck, but it's in pretty decent shape. And I can't see any reason why it wouldn't get us through a year or two until we could purchase a new truck.
Yeah.
2 more years, it'll be a classic. It'll be worth some money.
Yeah. Sell it on eBay.
Yeah.
With the truck that you're talking about, I've dealt with them from Franklin Telephone. Is there any reason why you see that couldn't last longer than 2 years?
I don't. I mean, it's an older truck, but barring some weird breakdown with it, we could certainly push it as long as we can.
Right, because it's not really about the truck; it's more about the digger, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it has a few functions. It doesn't have the 4-wheel drive that we use a lot, that we have in the past with the last 2 digger trucks. But that's not a showstopper by any means. We can certainly make use of this for as long as we can.
Yeah, because if I recall, that truck is in pretty good shape, and those are easy to repair and fairly inexpensive to operate. And if you think that it'll last, I don't really think that we would need to budget for that extra $190,000 right now.
The purchase of a new digger truck, the estimated cost for one similar to what we just had totaled out, brand new, was between 280 and 290,000.
Okay, right. And so your old one, that was what, 2005, 2006?
2005, yep.
Okay, so this truck's only 7 years older than the one we had.
Yep.
Well, something to think about. We'll let you know, though, that the cost of a new digger is not reflected in this budget, because we know that there's going to be at least a year in the delivery time from it once you put the order in. So we shouldn't receive any expenses on paying for the truck in 2021. We're expecting, we'll probably receive it sometime in 2022, and therefore, you would see a reflection of that in next year's budget. But in 2021's budget, there's actually nothing reflected in this draft that shows an expense for a new digger truck, because we simply wouldn't incur any expense on it. If it was approved, all we would do is put the order in. So just letting you know that as well. But if you want to consider maybe holding on to the used truck from Franklin Telephone longer, it's certainly something we can talk about if you want to discuss that.
Yeah, I mean, while we have Dave right here, what would you think? Do you think that you could run that for the foreseeable future?
I obviously will run it as long as I need to. And I don't see a reason. It's functioning well right now. It's passed all of its inspections, the DOT inspection that you folks have done, plus it's had its current boom excuse me, boom inspection, and we'll probably do one again this next summer in the time frame we usually would do it on our digger that we would have. And as long as it passes that, it's certainly usable, that's for sure.
And is there anything that it doesn't have that you need?
It can do, other than the 4-wheel drive, it does have a winch capstan that we have yet to try on it. Bert Maynard verifies with us that it does work fine. We have yet to use that. We haven't pulled any wire with this truck yet.
Okay, and like I said, I'm familiar with that truck, and I think it would be fine for.
Yeah, it certainly seems to run fine, and all the operations we've used on it seem to work fine right now.
Yeah, so I think that we could hold off. I mean, that's a major expense that we don't need to have right now for buying a new digger truck, unless you really think that we need a new one.
Right now, I've got one to operate, so I'm happy at this point in time.
Okay. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but I'd say just buy the used one and we can run that one for now.
Well, that's what Jonathan said. He said that the new truck's not even on here.
Right, but I'm saying don't put the order in, not for a new one. We'd be saving $250,000 plus. So, it's possible that this digger truck will run 10 more years. I mean, they're pretty solid.
Right.
And if something happens to that one, there'd be a year wait time for a new one, or probably look for another used one maybe.
Right, we don't need to go new.
In the past, we purchased used digger trucks before. The last digger truck we had, the one that's in the accident, that was the first new digger truck this department's had that I know of.
That
Yeah,
was a 2005.
I think we should just buy the used one, run that. Maybe give it a paint job, green, match the other ones.
All the other trucks are white now.
Oh, they are, okay. Perfect.
Yeah, well, that's completely up to you guys as a board. If you would rather, we delay thinking about that, we can take that right out of there. But it's actually, as I said, not reflected in the draft budget that you guys have in front of you, because we were, with the lead time, we were not expecting to incur any expenses on it until sometime in 2022. But we can just, put that totally on the back burner if the board prefers.
And we received our insurance payout from the old one, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Put that money aside for a digger truck if this one fails in the near future. We would have some money set aside.
Okay. All right. Am I hearing then? Is that an agreement from the board? Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
A consensus? That was the word I was looking for. Consensus from the board?
So was it in the intention, like the 72 was going to be put aside for the order of the new truck, John?
Yeah, we had talked about maybe taking the 9,000 for the purchase of the used truck out of there, but we could also take it out of the equipment fund as well, if the board would prefer that. So there's a few different ways that we could pay for the used truck, if depending on what the board's preference is. But if you would rather we take the full 72,000 from the insurance settlement and just put that aside with the intention of being used at some future point for another digger truck, we can certainly do that too.
Well, let's take the 9 out of the 72. Let's pay for the used truck for the insurance payout.
Okay,
And then it can have its own little digger truck fund, whatever's left over.
it's a good start anyway, right?
Oh, hey, Leonard's back. Where'd you go?
I don't know what happened. I lost you all. I'm back.
Okay, so how much did you miss?
About 2 minutes.
Okay, so the used digger truck, we're thinking that we want to buy that and run that and don't order a new one. Dave said it seems to work fine and he can get by with that. And I've seen the truck personally and I think it's in good shape, and I've never run the digger part, but the truck itself is in good health. So
Mhm.
I'm thinking if you think so, we'll take the $9,000 to pay for the old truck out of the insurance payout from the old one. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Just a cautionary note to remind the board that if something catastrophic were to happen to that used vehicle and it became unusable, you still have that 12-month lead time. So you'll be faced with either renting or finding another temporary solution if you then have to wait 12 months to order the new one. So just keep that in mind as you delay that decision.
That's the same situation that we had with the old digger truck, though.
Yep.
So nothing really changed on that behalf. But it's good that we do have such a tight relationship with Swan.
Yeah, they've been great to work with always. It's nice to have such a good working relationship between our two electric departments. You know, really close units, and you know, we help them out whenever they need it, and they help us out whenever we need it. So it's very good working relationship, and you know, my opinion, another feather in the cap of public power. You know, and when you have utilities that can work together so closely like that, it's, you know, two is stronger than one.
Okay, so does that sound like a plan to everyone?
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good to me.
Just a quick question. Would you like me, over the next couple of years, to keep an eye out? We get information sometimes on used and new digger trucks, but on used, we barely just missed one for about 180,000, a 2-year-old one, which was pretty much identical to our truck, but it was only 2 years old. That just got sold just as we were asking about it. Do you want me to keep an eye out for that in the next couple of years here, just in case something like that comes up?
Absolutely, yeah. And we could always budget extra funds for that, because I know just like the sweeper situation, sometimes it takes too long to make a decision on buying used equipment because it'll get sold before.
Yeah.
But we will have some of that insurance money left over if they need a deposit or whatnot. The board could act as quickly as we can before we budget for something.
Yeah, like I say, I foresee no problems with this one, you know, for the foreseeable future. But it's good to keep an eye out, since it is a used truck, keep an eye out if some really fantastic deal comes along or something.
Absolutely, yeah. John?
Oh,
Has it been 29 minutes?
I think so.
Must be.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions on that? I don't know if we want to wait for John to get back or not, but, or if Matt, if you can.
Okay. Sorry, I missed the last thing you said, Sam. Is there more stuff on the electric fund?
You can add.
So I don't know if the board wants to go through any of the significant variances or items of concern. I think John covered some of them in his summary memo. We're basically looking at a significant cash flow shortage. Portion of that is additional investment that's being made in the FERC relicensing. We've had some discussions with the folks at VEPSA and with John, and it may be time for us to consider doing some short-term financing to replace some of the cash that's already gone out for that FERC relicensing process. The intent was to do long-term financing for that. Once the license was issued, we know what our total costs were and we could capitalize it over the 30 years that the license renewal lasts. As it stands right now, we've spent $176,000 out of cash flow on this relicensing effort. And we have an estimated $265,000 remaining, most of which will be expended in 2021. That's going to put us at $450,000 all in for the cost of the relicensing. We do have a line of credit, which the electric department carries and hasn't utilized for a couple of years, but it's still active. I don't have interest rates for 2021 for it yet. I would need to reach out to People's Trust, who we carry that line with. That's a $750,000 line of credit. So we could easily tap into that and replace some of the cash flow that's gone out for this capital investment with some short-term line of credit financing until we're ready to do long-term bond financing for FERC. Yes, Cindy?
Do we get any kind of return on that licensing? Or it's just money that needs to get spent every 30 years to relicense?
So what that relicensing enables you to do is continue to operate the hydro plant, which reduces our cost of energy, purchased energy, significantly. It probably has around $100,000 a year value at typical output levels. So rather than having to purchase energy on the open market, we're able to generate it at a much lower cost through the hydro plant. So that's your return on investment for making that investment in the relicensing, is that low cost energy production that you don't have to purchase out in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you.
Credit to hold this over short term until we can establish a bond once the licensing process is done.
I missed the first couple of words of that, Sam.
That's what your plan is.
That's a suggestion to the board, and I would, be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. There are some concerns that we need to make sure whatever method we use to obtain financing for the FERC project, that we do it correctly and follow the right board rules from the Public Service Department. If we don't go about the short-term financing correctly, then the Public Service Department may not allow us to consider that debt service cost in our rate analysis. So VEPSA is well informed about those processes so that they can give us good guidance about how to make sure that we're doing both the short-term and long-term financing properly. Because ultimately what you want is your annual debt service cost for that relicensing that's going to be spread out over hopefully at least 10, maybe even 30 years. I'm not sure if we'll be able to finance it for that long. I'm not sure what the rules are on that. You'd like to spread that capital investment out over the life of the capital asset. And then your annual debt service cost can be factored into your cost of operations from a rate case perspective. So I don't have all the answers to that yet, and I hope to know a little bit more before we complete the budget process, so I can give the board some information about if we use the line of credit, will it meet those requirements of the Public Service Department? And will we then be able to roll those debt service costs, short-term as well as the long-term costs, into our next potential rate analysis and rate case? I think that you might recall when we talked about the initial deficit for the electric department, there was a possibility that we would have to consider filing another rate case in 2021. We're still trying to pin down some of the numbers and see what the actual operating deficit is going to be, which is probably more like $275,000 in terms of actual operating deficit. Most of which, as John said, is being driven right now by purchase power costs that rose much more steeply since our 2019 costs that our last rate case was based on.
How much of an effect did the last rate change have on next year's budget?
So the rate case that we filed gained us about $100,000 at existing demand levels, load levels. Right now, VEPSA is not forecasting our load to shift dramatically over the next 12 to 18 months. So the assumption is that we would be generating about $100,000 in revenue in more in 2021 than we did in 2019. We captured about half of that in 2020 because we were able to put that rate into effect on July 1st. We have seen a little bit of load shift as a result of COVID, and it's tough to predict right now how much longer that's going to continue. Residential load have gone down, as you might expect. More people staying at home, utilizing power, but a lot of businesses have significantly reduced their loads. The net effect for us this year is about a 5% reduction in overall load.
Is there any major solar projects anticipated for 2021?
Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any big CPGs in the pipeline right now,
No,
do we?
nothing big, no.
Okay. So really, it's just the digger truck as far as major changes to the budget then.
Pretty much. Yep. And as you recall, there was some discussion earlier about the possibility of a position in the electric department, which we've stepped back from and right now are not including those new costs in this draft budget.
Dave, is there anything that you know of that the department could need or benefit from?
As far as equipment or maybe, and Matt and I have talked a little bit about this, maybe some engineering expertise on our power condition out on the lines. We know we have some power factor issues, something like that kind of stuff. Might not be a bad idea to have somebody look at. That might help our revenues a little bit, as far as, you know, our revenues, not the purchase power stuff, but help offset them purchase power problems, make sure our sales are more correct, that we're getting the money for the sales that we're.
Just like an engineer to come in to make sure that the system's running as efficiently as it can.
Well, there's stuff out on the line as far as capacitors and power conditioning out there that would make our power factor a little better here, so that we're actually collecting the revenues for the power we actually sell in a lot of places. You know, as our system gets older and as we're upgrading it, there's probably a few places that revenue, this is just my opinion, and an engineer might confirm this better, that we could capitalize on that a little better if we had the right power factor conditioning out there on the line.
I think that'd be a good idea.
And just to help kind of bridge the gap between the technical and financial aspects of what Dave's talking about, when you have a particularly low power factor, you're not necessarily metering correctly all of the energy that's being consumed at the customer's site. And so there's a couple different ways you can deal with that. You can condition the power on the lines to improve and increase your power factor, or you can actually seek out an adjustment in your tariff that allows you to charge a customer who has a particularly low power factor a premium charge for the fact that they're affecting your system load, and that you might be metering less energy than they're actually consuming. So there's a couple different ways you can approach that, but as Dave said, that the start of that is getting some assistance from engineers that can actually evaluate the condition of the system, determine where we have those power factor issues and what the best way to close that gap to make sure we're collecting the proper revenues from the proper customers.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Have you been in contact with any engineering firms to get timelines or quotes?
I have not. John, I and Matt have talked a little bit of checking with VEPSA a little bit. They may have staff or knowledge of people since we're a member of them anyway. Everybody keep in mind that this problem probably got a little worse in the last few years. As everybody knows, the sugaring industry out there has increased dramatically, and there's a lot more motor load and a lot more electronic load out there now than there ever has been. And it's widespread over the system now. It's not just one particular customer here or there.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to get some figures because it's relatively a quiet year for the electric department. I think it'd be good to get that running efficiently.
There may be, I'm not sure what the cost associated with that would be, but I'm sure there'd be some cost to get some engineering done.
And just to clarify, if you choose to go that route, again, that can be a capital investment. We can look at how that is financed so that that's not necessarily coming out of operating cash flows.
Do you think the study would be that expensive?
I have no idea.
I have no sense of that either. John, do you have any?
Well, I apologize for the technical difficulties there. Obviously, I missed a few minutes of the conversation, so I'm not exactly sure where you guys are in the conversation. It sounds like you're talking about trying to clean up some of the power factor load within the electric departments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Engaging an engineering consultant to kind of evaluate what our current conditions are and the best way to resolve it.
Yeah, I don't, we've talked about it just in theory at different times, but we've never really looked into what it would cost to do something like that. So I'm afraid I don't really have a good estimate that I could give anyone. We would just have to talk to an engineer and get some quotes from at least one, if not a couple of different ones, if it was something you wanted to have budgeted in the 2021 budget.
Yeah, I think if we can get some numbers, maybe something to consider. I know that we're not going to wrap up electric tonight, so something to include for future discussions.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to see what an estimate would be, we can get in touch with some engineering firms and see what they come back with us.
The only other
You can think of, Dave?
Did you guys talk about the increase in the FERC relicensing costs? Okay.
Dave, the only other thing that I would suggest is we know that when we did the renovation on the hydro plant, our goal was to get back to around 5 million kilowatt hours annually in generation. If memory serves, we're going to come in at just about 4 million this year. We did have some low water conditions, and then we did have a couple of periods where the units were offline. I'm curious what input Dave or John might have at this point about whether or not we still think the 5 million is attainable, and whether or not there's anything that we would want to adjust in terms of either investment or in resources to help us meet that goal. That probably has the potential, that additional million in kilowatt hour generation could potentially save us a couple $100,000 in our purchase power cost.
We still have, of course, the control issues at the Kendall plant, which just lately have caused us a little grief again, and they rear up from time to time throughout the year, and that's lost some generation for us. That we've been talking about with Mr. Olson to get maybe that resolved in this next year, and hopefully that increases some of our production on that plant over there quite a bit.
Will the unifying of those controls allow those to run in synchrony better so that
Yes,
it can shift output from the units as the river conditions change?
it has the potential for that. How far we go with that is to be seen, but it will have the potential for that.
And I apologize. So if we were to get from 4 million, which we hit this year, to 5 million, which was our goal, that would be a value of about 40,000 in terms of our reduction in purchase power costs. And that's a rough estimate, but our cost out there on the marketplace is roughly 4 cents a kilowatt.
I'm having trouble remembering where we left off with the Olson thing. John, you may remember better than I.
Yeah, Jerry Olson is supposed to be coming back up, I believe, to continue his work to, help us get into the next part of automation with this system, and that involves updating a lot of the electronics. I realize we've got a different board makeup now than we did 3 and 4 years ago when we were talking about the last round of major renovations that we did to the hydro facility, which were completed in, I believe it was October of 2018. And, we were never able to get 100% of that automation work done that we had originally intended to, because all the bids came in too high for the reconstruction of both facilities. It was really plant number 1 that most of the money was intended to go into, but there was a little bit of work that was going to be done to the Kendall plant as well. A lot of the work, a lot of the original basis for the project had to do with the electronic guts and the automated parts of the hydro facilities. And most of that was never done. It was simply too expensive when the bids came in for us to do. So we ended up tailoring back quite a bit of the original scope of work for the project in 2017 in order to get at least the basic parts of the renovation to plant number 1 completed and stay within budget, because the board was also at that time not in favor of going out to request a second bond from the ratepayers in the community in order to support a higher budget to get some of this other work done that was not going to fit in the budget that we had available. So without going into a lot of the drama and discussion that took place during that period, that's basically, why we're, a little bit behind in trying to get the electronic parts of the hydro facility up and running as efficiently as they could be. And the last, year and a half or so, we've been kind of chipping away at that, trying to do what we can, working with Olson Electric in order to get at least some of that automation done. And Dave, can you remember exactly what the next phase of that Jerry Olson was going to come in and do?
Yeah. He has installed essentially a brain over in the Kendall plant over there that monitors the water flows right now for the FERC relicensing. But that brain can also be used to control the Kendall and replace that old existing control in there that's constantly giving us grief. And right now, all he's got to do is basically do the hard wiring. It's a little more complex than that, but it's really just the hard wiring into that brain from the old controls over there, so that the new control for the village unit can control both of those units. And that's what we're waiting on a bid. And he has got Hans from MEI is supposed to be coming up here to look over the whole thing. He will be the electrician working for Olson to do that work, so he can give us a scope of work and a price on that.
And the board may notice that we're still holding an item on the capital list to complete that control work. Although this was a number that we had from last year, and we're not sure whether or not that number covers the remaining wiring work, but there's $10,000 still sitting on that capital project to try and finish reintegrating that control.
So we will continue working on that as we can, and hope we can squeeze some more efficiencies out of those two plants. But I guess to answer the bigger question that you started off asking, Matt, I still have faith that with some more work, we can eventually get to the numbers that the original engineering studies indicated we could get out of those facilities once the renovations were completed. The problem was we weren't able to do everything that we originally hoped to do in the scope of work with the renovations, and that has delayed some of the efficiencies that we had originally hoped to draw down off from the plant. But we're still working on that. We're still chipping away on it. And, we left $1 million worth of work on the table in 2017. That was the final compromise that we made in order to get at least all of the basic parts of the renovation done to plant number one. And a good part of that $1 million, I think it was close to around $600,000 of that work, had to do with all the electronic and automation components of the facility. Is that you, Dave?
Yeah, the scanner went off.
Do you know how to put yourself on mute, Dave?
What's that?
You know how to put yourself on mute?
I was just turning the radio. The radio was way up high. The two-way was over there.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm hearing it from our scanner as well in the office. Okay, it stopped. So, yeah, to answer your question, Matt, I think that, we still have the possibility of reaching those numbers, but we do need to still do a little bit more work on the plant. The game plan that we had discussed 2 and 3 years ago was that once we got done with the FERC relicensing process, we would come back to the drawing board, look at the remainder of the scope of work that did not get completed in 2017 and 2018 on the facilities, and then reevaluate whether it was worth pursuing that additional work at that time or not. And it was estimated that the FERC relicensing process would take approximately 5 years. And that process started in the spring of 2018. So we're going into the third year, I guess, of that process now, with another 2 years. Hopefully, if all goes well, within another 2 years after this, we'll have our FERC license, hopefully, if all goes well. So, that was kind of the game plan, what had been discussed with the Board of Trustees back in 2017 and 2018. And so we're in the middle of doing those things. We're doing the electronic upgrades that we feel we reasonably can to try and squeeze more efficiencies out of the plant until we reach that time period at the end of the FERC relicensing process. And then once we're done with that, and we don't have to, be concerned about how FERC may feel about some of, about us doing major improvements to the plant while we're going through the relicensing process. Because that was a concern that our consultants, had about us trying to do more really substantial work to the plant. FERC generally doesn't like to see that while you're going through the relicensing process, and they felt that could, potentially negatively impact how the relicensing process goes. So they recommended to us that we wait until we're done with that relicensing process before we take on any other really major work with the plants. So does that, at least for the time being, answer those questions?
Yeah, I understood a lot of that, John, and my question really was more directed toward Dave in terms of whether or not there were any operational type resources that would help in the interim as we get to a more fully automated plant status. I realize that's a longer range project. Right now, the market value of what we generated this year from the hydro is around $152,000, and if we can reach that 5 million kilowatt hour output goal, that would rise to around $200,000 value annually. So,
And that's annually.
yes. Yeah, so we're about 48,000 shy of our goal right now in terms of the value of the energy on the market that we would like to be generating.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's something fairly reasonably inexpensive and easy to do in the meantime before we get our license, the sooner the better.
Understood. So again, apologize for the time. My computer was rebooting, but did you guys conclude about VEPS's, still taking a look at our power supply cost numbers? Did you guys talk about that at all?
Just what you mentioned in the original overview, John.
Yeah.
They're trying to refine those numbers and make sure that there aren't any errors. The numbers that I have today are a draft budget for the power supply, and they're still finalizing that. I don't imagine that it's going to move significantly more than a factor of maybe $10,000 or $20,000 one way or the other.
Yeah, it probably won't go down anything close to the deficit that we're currently showing in there. But it is possible that, we could see some positive movement as, we get closer into or we get further, I should say, into the budgeting process. Probably be another 2 to 3 weeks before we get the final numbers from VEPSA, but this is what they look like right now. This is our best information from them right now, but they are continuing to scour those numbers to make sure there's nothing that they missed in there, or that something changes in the market over the next couple of weeks. And so you may see an update from us according to what VEPSA has to tell us over the next couple of weeks in the power supply costs. And also, Matt and I have talked about capitalizing some of the FERC relicensing related costs. Did you bring that up to them? Okay, all right, great. Okay, just wanted to make sure it got covered.
The only other comment that I wanted to add is, you're all aware that we submitted a rate case filing and had about a 4.8% increase effective July 1st. We're still looking to operate at an operating deficit this year. So the question has been raised as to whether or not we need to consider another rate filing in the near term. I've had some conversations with Steve Herman at VEPSA, who helps us with that process. His recommendation is that we take a look once the numbers are finalized for 2020 and we've completed the audit, and compare that against our baseline that was used in the 2020 rate case to see what costs have moved and how much they've moved, and whether or not we want to consider another rate case in 2021, and whether or not that might help to close that gap somewhat. We should know a little bit more about that in another week or two. Yes, Cindy?
Wouldn't that line of credit help cover that?
two separate things. We're still actually not collecting enough revenue from our customers to cover our operating expenses. So our rates aren't right. They're not in alignment with our operating costs right now. What we're talking about with the cash flow is below the line, if you will, after your operating revenues are applied to your operating expenses. Then you have other cash expenses that go out for things like your debt service and your depreciation, et cetera, and this capital project for the FERC relicensing. That's where we've been funding a lot of that effort through our operating cash flows. And we want to restore those operating reserves because we've almost depleted all of the cash reserves we had from operations from previous years. And we're at a point now where we're looking at needing to do some interfund borrowing just to cover cash flow from month to month. And we need to turn that back around by financing those capital investments.
Matt, the rate case adjustments you're talking about, is that something that's temporary or a permanent?
No, that would be another assessment. So the rate case we submitted several months ago was based on actual costs from 2019. If we were to file a rate case today, we'd have to use those same 2019 costs because we don't have audited results yet for 2020. But once we have audited results for 2020, and I can tell you that there's a couple of areas where our actual costs were higher in 2020 than they were in 2019, as well as some potential increases going into 2021. The Public Service Department will not allow you to base your rate case on your budgeted costs. It will only allow you to base your rate case on known and measurable costs. So they look at your past costs, and then you have to be able to identify anything that you already know is going to be different for the upcoming year. For instance, if you have a union contract and it's got a 3% rate escalator in it, that's known and it's measurable and it's a documented contracted cost. You can factor that in terms of an increase over your actual from the prior year.
So these additional costs were not known when we did the rate.
Some of them we suspected, but again, we couldn't demonstrate to the department that they were known and measurable. So we had to rely on the 2019 numbers. But you know, our power generation in 2020 was almost $40,000 more than the power generation costs that were approved from 2019 in our most recent rate case. So those are now known and measurable, and we could go back and recover that $40,000 in a rate adjustment. So there are some things that we could pick up if we choose to do another rate case in 2021 based on 2020 actual costs.
Right, maybe a good year to do so too, since we would have current numbers for both.
The other side of that coin is considering the impact on the ratepayers. I mean, you only have two options. You can reduce your operating costs, try and come in line with the revenue recognition that you're making, or you can, go out and adjust rates and try and collect the revenue associated with your actual operating costs. We're not likely to have a significant growth in load. I mean, that's the other thing that can change whether or not you're covering your operating costs. Our marginal cost of energy is relatively small. But there's a lot of fixed costs, and if you're covering them on 25 million kilowatt hours of load, it's a bigger number than if you've got 30 million kilowatt hours of load to spread that across. But we're not seeing a significant change in load characteristics, at least based on what we've had in the last couple of years trend and what VEPS is forecasting for us. If we pick up some additional customers that have some load, then that could change. But as far as I know, the only thing that's even a potential commercial construction right now is Tractor Supply. And that's, even if it goes, that's several months down the road and probably wouldn't have much impact in 2021. I guess there's the potential that Franklin Foods could continue to move forward with their cogen and digester facility. which could actually have some additional load factor for us. But we don't know much about that yet.
Dave, how far up Longley Bridge Road do our lines go?
How far up Longley Bridge Road?
Yeah.
Past Kerm White's, two places past Kerm White's sugar house. You know where Kerm White Sugar House is?
Yeah.
We just picked up Mr. Holburn's sugaring operation up there. Yet to see, we've got probably some line upgrades to do. That and Dean Wright's building a sugar house out there now, and
I was gonna say, there's
we've
a
got
couple
3
more.
other sap pumps out there besides that.
Yeah.
So Hoburn's operation, we did get some estimated loads from Dave on that, and those have been factored into both revenue and purchase power cost estimates for 2021. But as Dave said, we're not really going to know until we see a season
Yeah.
what real impact that's going to have.
And it will take him a couple of years to fully get that operational up there.
So there is some potential load growth on the horizon, but it's not going to move the needle a lot.
Right. All right. So do you think we about covered electrical for tonight?
So if I can recap, I have a note that we're going to look for some cost estimates for engineering for load factor analysis, and that we're going to delay the order on the new digger truck until further guidance from the board.
Cindy?
I have a question about, there's a line item for memberships and dues. What is that?
So there's a
Membership
couple of-
to what? Dues
Yep.
for what?
Memberships and dues are costs to be members of a couple of the electric utility affiliations that we belong to. So one is Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. There's another one that we're members of at a regional level, meaning New England, and that's called Northeast Public Power Association, NEPA for short. Also has, or I should say provides the safety training for our electric utility crews. This is a monthly training that is required under federal law. And one of the bigger benefits that we get from NEPA is they supply those monthly safety trainings to our electric utility crews, but there's other things too. They're also very active politically, not just at a regional level, but also on a national level, and work to push goals and objectives that the organization collectively across New England, representing all the public power members across all 6 states in New England, have jointly. And we'll fly down to Washington, D.C. to give testimony and help work with other lobbyists that can push our agendas as public power electric utilities in Washington at the federal level. And then there's a third electric organization that we are also a member of, and that's American Public Power Association. That's a national organization that represents all public power utilities across the country. So those are 3 organizations that our electric utility is a member of. I'm sure I brought this up to you before, but just as a reminder, I serve as a board of director on 2 of those organizations. I'm your representative to VEPSA, and I'm also one of 4 representatives from Vermont on the NEPA board as well.
Okay, I was just curious. I didn't know if it was union dues that we were paying for our guys or not.
Yeah, they got to pay their own union
Yeah, that's
dues.
what I thought. All right, thank you. All right, moving on.
Okay, so if nobody has any other questions or additions or comments or anything like that, we can wrap up the electric department for tonight and move on to the general fund, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay. So hopefully everybody had an opportunity at least to take a little bit of a look at the Public Works Department and General Fund. Currently, we're showing an increase of 5.99% in the tax rate from 2020. This does assume a carryover from 2020 to 2021 of $24,000 in the budget. I believe Matt said that number could still change $1,000 to $2,000 in the next couple of weeks. We're getting ready to go through our auditing process as well right now, so he'll know a little better another week or two down the line as to what that number is really going to be. But in the draft you have in front of you, we're showing $24,000 as a carryover in the general fund from 20 to 21. Drivers for the increases in the tax rate are a $7,050 increase in maintenance of parks, which include the 4 picnic tables that were requested by the Board of Trustees to be placed on Lincoln and Maple Parks. And then also staff decided to put in 2 sets of garbage and recycling bins on Maple Park, because I don't know if the board ever noticed, but there's actually no garbage cans on Maple Park. And when we were thinking about it, we realized, well, you know, if we're going to put 2 picnic tables on there, that's going to attract people that are bringing garbage and waste with them. We probably better put some garbage cans in there then. So that number also does include 2 sets of garbage and recycling bins for Maple Park as well. We're also showing the cost of a portalet to be placed on Lincoln Park for 7 months from April to October. You know, we made the assumption that you wanted to carry that practice over from last year. You recall last spring, the Enosburg Initiative had requested that the village put a portalet up on Lincoln Park. It seemed to go well. People seemed to enjoy it. So we folded that into the budget as well this year again. You can let us know if that's not something you want to see in there, but wanted to make sure you were aware that we put that formally into the budget for 2021. There's also $21,000 in principal payments that will hit the general fund from the road paving projects that were completed in 2020. So those things didn't hit the budget in 2020 because we were in the process of constructing them and then working through the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank to get that bond in place. And so we're going to have, you know, full 12 months of those road paving project payments to make in 2020. So that's also a part of the increase in the general fund and the increase in the tax rate. Also, we've got $5,249 that are due to several different combined increases from the Public Works Department. All of these items together account for the bulk of the increase of the general fund. But I would also just like to point out to the board another trend that's going on in the fund. And that is, you'll note the increases in the bond payments from last year's road projects. It's also worth pointing out that this draft budget does not show any impact to the tax rate for the proposed projects that we're looking at to be completed in 2021. Again, for the same reason, because the cost of actually financing those road projects won't hit the tax rate until the following year, until 2022. So the board just needs to keep this in mind when you're thinking about doing these large capital investments, that very often, and always has been the case with the road projects that we've been steadfastly working on over the last several years, you're not seeing the full impact of that until the following year. So I just feel like I need to point that out to you guys. We've pointed it out before, but you know, we've done so many road projects over the past few years. It's starting to catch up with us now. So you may want to think about that a little bit as, you know, you're looking at all of the road projects that we've got in the draft 2021 budget, and just realize what you're looking at in the 2021 draft doesn't reflect any of the bond payments that would come due the following year in 2022. So related to that, in your budget workbooks, you'll see a graph that Matt Miner put together that shows where we are and what the tax increases would be in the known projects that we have in place over the next 10 to 12 years. And so you can see how, you know, actions that we have taken previously are going to affect us in years going out. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that graph, Matt's pulling it up right now on the shared screen here. So you
How
can
come
see.
ours isn't in color?
Oh,
Sorry.
yours isn't in color? Sorry.
I did send that to the printer and asked for it to be color, and the printer chose to make it black and white. My apologies.
No worries.
It looks better in color, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, it's easier to differentiate the different categories in color.
Yeah. So there it is in color. Hopefully, maybe that'll stand out a little bit more to you. So the general, related to this too, the general fund reserves, which were discussed with the Board of Trustees last year, will be reduced significantly, you know, even if you don't do much else with the tax rate, based on the forecasts that we're looking at right now over the next 11 to 12 years or so. Much of these reserves would be used up if the board chooses to use them that way, in simply stabilizing the tax rate over the coming years. And I think both Matt and I think that this is, you know, perhaps a good way to use that surplus so it's not quite a shock to ratepayers in the community. This will help buffer some of that. So given those impacts, that's a recommendation that both Matt and I would like to make to the board to help stabilize that tax rate over the next 11, 12 years or so. We can discuss that more as we go through the budgeting process if you want, but that's also something I wanted to bring up as part of our budget discussions regarding public works and the general fund. So I think with that, I will stop. We do have Gary Denton here and Kenny LaPlante from Public Works Department. Either Gary or Kenny, is there anything that you would like to add or any questions that you have of the board right now?
I don't have any right now.
You're good, Gary? Okay. Any questions from the Board of Trustees for Gary or Kenny?
Cindy?
Well, I've noticed that there is a significant drop in the maintenance of the street lighting, so it was well worth our having street lights all changed out to LED. It saved us $12,000, so I thought that was neat. We could see that already.
Yeah, agreed, Cindy. That was, I think, a good move, and it's already paying off for us.
So
Right,
I'm seeing $100,000 finance for plow truck replacement in the fall of 2021. What truck was that exactly? I think you're muted, Gary.
Yeah, Gary, I can see your mouth moving, but you're still muted.
How's that?
There you
Better.
go.
That's basically the truck we just fixed the motor on, Sam.
That's what I was. That's the one I was hoping it wasn't.
We're worried about that motor.
No, yeah. Should be good for a while now, though.
I hope so. I mean, Kenny can talk more about it than I can.
Yeah, we had a long and somewhat painful discussion internally amongst staff about this issue, Sam. And at the end, we decided to at least show it in your preliminary budget, realizing that, you know, you as the board may have different feelings about it. But and Kenny, I certainly don't want to speak for you, but there is still some anxiety amongst the Public Works Department about how that engine is going to perform, even though we just, you know, put a significant amount of money into rebuilding it. Apparently that engine has a very bad reputation, and the Public Works Department is still concerned that, you know, a year from now or longer, it may not perform well. We may have some serious problems with it. And like the digger truck in the electric department that we were discussing just a little while ago, there's also a very long lead time. It's around the same, about a year, for a new plow truck as well. And Kenny's concern was, well, you know, what happens if that thing conks out on us again in 12 months and we haven't ordered a new truck? We're going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place again, and faced with, you know, possibly having to rebuild that engine again at a very significant cost and still be no better off. So after, you know, some kind of painful discussions, we decided to at least show it in the preliminary budget. And Kenny, please add anything else you'd like to, or Gary.
I like Kenny. He's more of a mechanic than I am. I'm just
Well, I'm just thinking that you know, if we had to put another 20,000 into it, that wouldn't be a good idea. We could put that 20,000 into a purchase of a new truck down the road, and while that truck has still got some value, we're thinking that maybe this is the time. It is the 7 years. There is some things showing some rust on it. It's nothing that can't be fixed, but this is where we are right now. So we're making that recommendation.
And if I could add to that, you know, when we were evaluating whether to repair or replace the truck when it broke down this fall, we were given anecdotal reports from others who have a vehicle with the same engine, that they had repaired the engine the same way we did, and then within 12 to 24 months saw the same failure occur. There seems to be a defect in the motor that increases the potential for it to do the same thing that it did this time.
And that same defect and reputation has a tendency to decrease the value of those trucks.
Yep.
They weren't good.
Yep.
But we just did replace 2 major semi-wear items on that. And it went 7 years without an issue before.
and we do have a 1-year guarantee right now, Sam.
Okay.
So we're good for a year.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that there are a couple dealerships that specialize in municipal plow trucks that do keep plow vehicles on hand.
We tried that, Sam, and they didn't have any on that we could use when our truck went down this winter.
Yeah, no, but they do have new ones to purchase.
Oh, yes.
So there wouldn't necessarily be a 12-month lead time. If we needed one, we could have it.
Yes, international right now, I mean, if we wanted to go with them again, they said that they spec out and they have certain single axles, certain tandems that they build themselves to have on their lot. So yes, that is true, Sam.
Well, if there's a warranty on that, I don't think we should be worrying about it this year. I mean, it would be unfortunate if anything did happen because we would be out of a truck, but if there was a warranty, I would assume that they would also provide a loaner if it did happen in the winter or whatnot.
Well, we tried that, Sam. They didn't have any loaners they give out. Right, Ken? There was no loaners.
That's right.
Right, but it wasn't a warranty thing, so.
Oh.
Yeah.
That may be different.
Maybe.
Right. That may be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the rest of the board feels, but I think it may be a better discussion to have next year. But in the meantime, we could always get some quotes from international and others.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
So if I can clarify the assumptions that staff made and how we drafted this for you, the assumption would be that if you chose to proceed with ordering a replacement vehicle after the budgets were approved in March, that that vehicle would come in with luck just in time for the fall 2021 plowing season. Your actual cost in 2021 would be about 0.07 on the tax rate, with 2.2 cents on the tax rate for future years. So if you delay that process, if you hold off till there's a problem with the vehicle and order it, we can hope that we have a vehicle available that we can get in the short term if it fails during plowing season. Or if we're lucky and it fails off season and we have some time to find and acquire a replacement, that's going to add roughly 2 cents to the tax rate at whatever point you choose to or are forced to make that replacement.
So you're saying it's going to be 2 cents higher if we don't plan for it?
No, it will cost you 2 cents whether or not you order it now before the vehicle fails or wait until, heaven forbid, the engine goes down again in the future and you're not in a position to replace it. It cost us $20,000 to repair that this year. The debt service on the replacement vehicle is about $20,000 a year. So if you go 2 years without the engine failing, you've saved $20,000 in the long run. But if you only go a year, it's a wash whether you pay that debt service on the new vehicle or you pay the repair on the old vehicle.
The only thing you'd be losing is peace of mind.
And potentially the ability to plow if it breaks down like it did this year, right in the middle of the beginning of the plow season.
Right.
So we should just get it now.
We wouldn't have had that conversation about whether or not to replace it or repair it.
Right. We had no choice but to repair it. And if it breaks down like that again during next winter, we probably will have no choice but to repair it again.
Yep. But there's a 12-month warranty, so.
Cross fingers.
Well, if it's only going to be 2 cents either way, we should probably just do it and be done with it. And then you'll have two. And hopefully.
That cost assumes you're trading in the vehicle.
Yeah, trade that vehicle in.
And it assumes that the vehicle's not broken when you trade it in. Because it'll have virtually no value if the engine blows and then you replace it.
We have more trucks than we have drivers.
So if we're not able to plow for some reason, is there a way to get help from other
We did.
while you're waiting?
The state of Vermont was very nice. They plowed Main Street for us when we were down, and they also plowed West Berkshire Road for us. And Joey helped us on Duffy Hill a little bit, but Kenny pretty much plowed with the ton truck and the 3/4 ton pickup.
And is
Go ahead.
there
Heather.
added expense when, like, was that really like help, or is that help with a bill?
No, that was help with no money.
That was very gracious mutual aid.
Yes,
Yeah, you
But there's
can't,
no guarantee that other people can help us
right.
all the time. I mean, what if it's, really
yeah,
bad winter?
right, I want to make that clear. There's no like
Guarantee.
emergency hotline that you can call for municipalities, if your equipment goes down. We just have to try our best to, get some cooperation from other folks around that have that type of equipment that they can do heavy duty snow plowing. And we got a little bit lucky that after the engine blew, we didn't have a snowstorm for a while. I think it was like a week and a half to 2 weeks before we had another snowstorm after that. So we were lucky that Mother Nature bought us a little time, and we were able to get the engine repaired during that period where we didn't have another storm come in. But it could have been worse. I mean, it could have happened, during a winter where we had back-to-back snowstorms, which of course everyone knows can happen. And if it happened during that period, it would have been a lot stickier for us. So, and that, it's all weather dependent, things like that. It's just, it all depends on what Mother Nature throws at you.
And right now, our warranty just about guarantees that we won't have this cost again in 2021. Although if it broke down a couple days after the warranty expired, that would still fall in 2021. So there's no reason to assume that you'll have that $20,000 cost in 2021. But whether you do or don't have it in 2022 depends on whether the engine continues to perform or you choose to replace it with a new vehicle.
Well, at the risk of sounding snooty, I guess, I don't know. Taxpayers expect their roads to be cleared and taken care of, then they should be expected to pay for it. And it's 2 cents.
Well, I think we're all doing everything we can here to minimize the impact on the ratepayers. And I understand Sam's perspective on, taking a little bit of a gamble to hope that engine can last more than the 12-month warranty period that we're covered. And worst case scenario, as I said, if it were to break down again, you can probably get through the short term while you're fixing it, but you will have that repair cost and have just kicked down the road the can of considering whether or not to replace that vehicle.
It's not like the roads aren't going to get plowed. Worst case scenario, we could hire a private contractor to come in and plow them. And
we would find a way, one way or another. I mean, we'd get Scott Goodhue on the phone, and anyone else we had that we could think of to make sure the job was getting done. I agree 100% with that, Sam. We're not saying we would not plow the road. We would do everything we had to make sure the roads were passable.
And the downtime for that repair was just over a week, so it's
Right.
not a major.
Another thing, if we waited, we probably wouldn't get the 40,000 value, so the cost of the new truck would be more.
Yeah, you're right. The trade-in value will go down and the purchase cost will go up as you push that further down.
You also need to remember too that trade-in value would be dependent on which brand you go with. Brand loyalty has a lot to deal with that. If we did go with an international, it would probably be around that number. Whereas if we went with a different brand, it would probably be lower than that. So you can't really base it off trade-in value currently.
Yeah. Also depends on whether or not you could consider a direct sale on the used vehicle, whether anybody would be willing to pay that much for a vehicle that has a known engine defect.
Right. I think we should remove that this year. that 100,000. Another thing to consider too would be maybe increasing annual, I wouldn't necessarily say repair costs, but maybe repair and or replacement. That way we don't just get hit with a one-time fee of, 250,000. We could have some reserved.
You could certainly include a reserve. You could move $20,000 into a reserve restricted fund for equipment replacement, so that whether or not you have to fix the engine or make payments on a new vehicle, that cost would be the same. And hopefully you'd go a couple, 3 years without having to do the replacement. And then saved half of the cost of the purchase when it comes around.
I think that's how pretty much all equipment should be handled. That way there are no surprises. And if you budget for a piece of equipment, say a plow truck lasting 7 years, if we put in 20,000 a year, then at the foreseeable lifespan, then we would have that, and our debt services costs would go way down.
That's what we do in Bakersfield. We have a equipment fund, and every year they put $10,000 in. So by the time 7 years comes up, they got a pretty good down payment.
Exactly. So maybe we can reduce that 100,000 to say 20,000 this year, and that would get rid of our engine surprise cost if something did happen next year.
Again, just to be clear, the only cost that's included in 2021's rate effect is $1,500 worth of interest for the couple of months that we would have the vehicle if we actually acquired a new one. So we haven't built $20,000 worth of cost into 2021. If you do that, that will increase this forecasted rate for the 2021 budget. Right now, it's assuming that cost would be starting in 2022. So do you want to incorporate that $20,000 reserve set aside in 2021 and see what that does to your stabilized rate forecast?
If it was up to me, I'd say yes. Building cash reserves for buying equipment is never going to be fun, but once you are at the point where you need to buy the equipment, then you'd be glad that you had the money there. So I think that we should put some money aside at least for that plow truck.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, me too.
If we can get into the habit of that and save the money on our debt services, and then maybe if all the equipment someday is kind of in that same situation, then I think that would cut down a lot on some costs. Do we want to go with like 20,000 for? You want to put 20,000 down?
Yeah.
Budget that in.
Sure.
For 2021.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully that would be an annual thing.
Right. Well, and keep in mind that that $20,000 a year on that vehicle is not inclusive of all the vehicles in the general fund. So
correct.
We can certainly come back with a little bit more detail about the current life and expectancy of existing vehicles and what their replacement costs might be, so that you can kind of figure out what your total depreciation value is annually.
But right now, Matt, we're pretty good shape. Both our new trucks are a couple of years old. I mean, we're pretty good shape for both our equipment's pretty new.
But as Sam is saying, if you start saving now for the replacement, we just replaced the F550. If you start putting in reserves now, then when it comes time to replace that, you've already put aside the money and you're not borrowing, you're using the reserves.
Yeah. I agree.
The problem is starting that hurts.
Yeah. And the other side of that coin, Sam, is right now it's more cost effective to borrow money than it is to save money. We put $20,000 aside and we're earning 0.5% on that in our reserve funds. We're borrowing funds today and it's around 1%. So, the cost in the near term to the taxpayer is the same, is actually lower if they finance a capital need when it comes up rather than borrowing or saving for it for the future. I don't know if I said that well.
Right. That's just in the current investment climate.
Yeah, the current climate, and that could change. I would say that interest rates right now, everything I'm seeing, are not going to be rising in the immediate future. But if COVID finally slows down and the economy starts to warm up, that could certainly change even in the next 12 months. Let's hope it does. That would be a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Okay. What's next?
Well, those were the two funds we wanted to get
Other
through
business.
tonight. I'm sorry, did I interrupt, Cindy?
Nope,
Did you have
sorry.
a comment?
Nope, thought I was muted.
So unless, if there's more questions about the general fund, we will certainly take those questions if everybody is okay for the time being. I think that was it. Tonight we wanted to get through electric and general fund. Next meeting next week, we've got, along with other items, because remember it's a regular meeting next week, so you'll have some other agenda items too. But regarding the budget, you'll have the water department and the wastewater department next meeting. And I think, Matt, you had your hand up?
I did, but Jason did too, if you want to go first, Jason.
Oh.
Yeah, I just had a couple notes on the road projects. A couple questions. So Church Street is pretty bad for between St. Albans and Pearl. And
Yep.
Bismarck seems bad going towards the dead end, but between Pearl and Bismarck, I thought the condition was a lot better than a lot of other streets in town. So I didn't know if there was a reason that street was chosen to be repaved.
Well, staff had been looking at it. It's been a long time since Church Street was paved. You are correct. One part of it is definitely worse than another. I agree with you. The section that's in between Pearl Street and St. Albans Street is definitely worse than the section between Bismarck Street and Pearl Street. But even the better looking section of it hasn't been paved in a long time. So, and it's a pretty major street in the community. It's used a lot, as is Bismarck Street. As you know, Bismarck Street is almost kind of the same street. Technically, they're two different streets, but they're attached to each other. It didn't seem to make, and if we were going to do all of Church Street, it didn't seem to make sense to try and end, where Church Street turns into Bismarck Street. You might as well just continue around the corner and end it on Main Street, which is technically Bismarck Street.
So does it also go back towards the dead end?
No, that's the extension. We weren't going to pave that, Jason.
Because that seems pretty bad.
That would be a private road now, right?
No, we plow it. I don't know when the last time the extension was paved. It was also a long time ago. But we're plowing it, so it is a public road. But we weren't looking at doing the extension in this. If you wanted us to look at that, we could get an estimate together to do the extension part of Bismarck as well, but it's not in this this budget estimate.
We didn't think, because it's not really much. It's more like a bit long driveway for 4 or 5 houses. It really wasn't a lot of traffic on it.
I was just curious on that. And also, I was wondering on Missisquoi, is it this to plan to go the whole street or just
Yep.
to the dirt?
No, just down below, just before Scott Goodhue's where it's paved now.
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah, we weren't gonna pave the dirt part of it,
Yeah, I
just,
was just wondering.
yeah, just the section that's currently paved.
Those are the questions I had.
So the only other thing I wanted to add and re-clarify for the board, the current draft includes doing $525,000 worth of paving projects in 2020. That will have, as John said, virtually no rate impact in 2021, about 0.4 of a penny. But it will add 5.3 cents to the tax rate in future years. So if we take a look at this graph of what's happening to the tax rate, assuming that we do the proposed paving projects at 525,000 this year, you're going to be guaranteed to reach a minimum tax rate of about 68 cents by 2024, right? And then the jump between where we are today at 54.24 to 68.58 is totally a function of the growth in the debt service projects. The 2019 paving that we did, the 2020 paving that we did, and the 2021 that we're currently considering. That's adding almost 15 cents to the tax rate over those three projects. If you choose not to do the paving in 2021 or to reduce that project, that 22 cents in debt service could come down to 17 cents, and this could come down to 63. But even if you don't do any paving in 2021, you're going to be at a tax rate of 63 by 2024, just with the decisions that have been made in the past year. So I want to make sure that everybody's clear about that. That's assuming that you don't make any other significant structural changes in the operating budget, that things remain relatively where they are today with just small inflation escalators. It also assumes that there's not a significant change in the grand list value. We do have some potential on the horizon for growth in the grand list, but there is nothing concrete yet that we can point to that says, yeah, grand list is going to go from here to here. And therefore that would soften the rate increase a little bit. So just, I want to make sure everybody understands that if you just level fund the general fund this year with its operating budget and don't do any capital investments, don't do the truck purchase, don't do the paving projects, you're still going to reach a tax rate of 63 cents unless you make other changes.
By 2024,
yep.
Not next year.
Yep. And as John said, you can see that we're trying to make this sort of a gentle growth by using some of the current reserves that were built up over the last 10 years. But there won't be any way not to sustain our current operating levels and debt service commitments that have already been made without reaching that higher tax rate. It's about a 6% growth over the next 4 years, each of the, from 2020 to 2024, that's 6% increases.
Yeah, so thank you for, re-clarifying that again, Matt. And certainly, I'm sure that gives the board some things to think about. Of course, we will be discussing the general fund as we will be discussing all of our funds again. This isn't certainly not our last discussion. We've still got several other budgeting meetings, but that's some stuff to think about there for sure. And if you feel like you want to give us some direction regarding the tax rate and what you want it to do for 2021, you know, we're all ears. We're here to try and help you create a budget that you feel okay about, that you feel you can stand before the community and support. So, you know, I don't know how you feel about what's currently shown here, that there's a 5.99% increase in the tax rate as it's shown to you right now. I don't know if you're okay with that, or if you prefer it to be something less than that. If there is some guidance that you want to give us right now, you know, we will take that to heart and see if we can make adjustments to, you know, what your suggestions are. But, you know, I just throw that out there. If you want to mull it over and think about it a little bit, certainly we'll be discussing the general fund again. So, you know, whatever the pleasure of the board is. But if you tell us tonight, we want to see, you know, whatever, no more than a 4% increase and that's it, then, you know, we will start beating the bushes and see if we can knock things out of the budget that would get it close to a 4% increase. Just as an example, I'm just throwing that out there. But if you want to mull things over, think about it, or if you know, you're okay with that tax rate, then, you know, just give us whatever feedback you feel you can. But you don't have to, you know, say something right now if you still want to mull things over a little bit. I certainly can understand that. But that was it for tonight's agenda. We just wanted to get through the electric department and the general fund. Matt?
So I just wanted to summarize the notes that I took. You'd like to remove the forecast for the new truck purchase for the time being. Replace that with a equipment reserve of $20,000 this year. And for purposes of forecasting tax rate, Sam, it sounded like you'd like to at least see what the impact of doing that annually is. So we would make the assumption that that would repeat in future years, and then you can see what that'll do long range to the tax rate. Right, and just even on that one piece of equipment, it'll give us kind of an idea about that kind of a, I guess, policy on new equipment.
So related to that, Matt, probably the next time we'll talk about the general fund is at the 19th meeting. Would you be able to have that complete for the board to take a look at for that 19th meeting? Yeah, you'll have this in a couple of days, and I'll send back out some emails to folks so that you can see what those changes you talked about tonight have done to the budget. So you got some time to mull that over before any of our future meetings. Okay, great. Did I miss any changes for the general fund?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Unless there's anything that anybody else wants to have included or removed or modified in any way.
As of now, you didn't ask for any changes to the paving, right?
Not right now. Okay. I don't think. Right? You weren't suggesting any changes.
No, I was just asking, curious.
Jenny, do you have a question?
Yeah, there was the section for trainings and
Yes.
yeah, trainings, I guess. Didn't we have a discussion about that? Heather brought it up for
Yes, we added $2,000 to the training budget across all 4 departments to incorporate the diversity and inclusivity training that Heather had talked about. So that is included in the draft budget for all 4 funds.
Yeah, so you don't see the whole.
It didn't look like it was enough money.
Right. So what we did, Cindy, is because the training that Heather was interested in getting impacts not just the general fund or the public works department, it impacts training for all the employees that serve all the departments in the municipality. We split the cost to do that training over all 4 of the funds.
Okay,
And when we have, there's actually a formula that was approved by our state government if we're going to charge anything to our electric department. As you know, our electric department is very highly regulated by
right,
our state government, so they had to approve this formula. So when you have things that are split equally or at least shared between all the departments, the formula that the state approved was to split those costs 70% electric, 10% general fund, 10% water, and 10% wastewater. So 70, 10, 10, 10. So that's how the costs of doing that training that Heather had suggested were split within the 4 funds. So the
Okay.
electric department is actually picking up the majority of the cost of that at 70%.
all right, thank you. I'm done.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Are we all set for tonight? All right, let's I guess let's wrap up tonight. We got some things to think about, and we'll see everybody next Tuesday.
All right, great. That was a good first budgeting meeting, guys. Appreciate all your time tonight.
Sam, are you going to ask for a motion to adjourn?
Yes. I'll need a motion to adjourn.
I make the motion, we adjourn.
Leonard with the first. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Heather with a second. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
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 All right. Everyone have a good night.